What's going on today, everybody? It's Buddy here. Today I'm going to show you guys how I took this super neglected, absolute nightmare of a Chevy Cobalt and turned it into thousands of dollars of profit. Now, not only am I a DIY channel, but I have started a segment on how to flip cars. It's actually what I do for a living full time. So if you want to learn how to get potentially profitable vehicles at low prices, how to fix them up and flip them and make a whole lot of money on the back end, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. I'm going to show you guys the entire process of how I made a few $1,000s off this Chevy, from how much I knew I should buy it for, how much I knew I should sell it for, how much money I had to put into it, and ultimately how much money I made. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. Now, there's a few places I do look to find cars for sale to flip. The biggest one is Facebook Marketplace. It seems to have taken over every other single app or website in terms of the biggest, but other ones I do use to keep my eye on is OfferUp and even Craigslist. Letgo and OfferUp have just merged, so OfferUp is going to be the place to go. It is the largest strictly app-based platform to find cars or local sales in your area. So I was just scrolling here on OfferUp to seeing if anything new popped up here in my area, and this little black Chevy Cobalt did catch my eye. So I decided to read the description of this car and see what it's all about. 2008 Chevy Cobalt needs oil change, needs jump started, so obviously it doesn't run. Has dent on the hood, needs side view mirrors replaced. Had work done last summer such as new AC, brakes, etc. Car runs and drives but needs to be jump started and battery charged. So the three things I really like about this description is need gone soon, open to offers, and no trades. Essentially what that means is that the seller is motivated. He wants the money. He doesn't want another car to trade. He needs the cash. So he's definitely willing to negotiate. So I shot the seller a message and said, hey, I may be interested in your vehicle. Can you tell me a little bit about it? He sent me back this long message. There's nothing wrong with the car itself. I haven't changed the oil in a while. That's kind of a red flag. I haven't driven in months. Another red flag. Just needs the battery charged, the side mirrors replaced, and the oil change, and it's good to go. And then he gave me a story how it came from Nebraska to Florida. So you also got to watch out because those northern cars do have a little bit of rust. So definitely be sure to keep that in mind when you are inspecting the vehicle. Now, even though he said the oil hasn't been changed in a while, which you can assume that it wasn't properly cared for if they're not changing the oil, and it hasn't ran in a few months, I'm still pretty interested in taking a look at it. One thing I do before I look at any car is do some research on the vehicle to see if there's any super common problems I should look out for. The only problem really specific to the Chevy Cobalt I could find was the electric power steering. You can see here it says even after the recall repair was performed, it still had some issues, so that's something to keep note of when you are doing the test drive. And also the engine in this car uses a 2.2 Ecotec motor, and it has a really common issue of the timing chain slipping, which could cause major engine damage. I know this just from all the years of working on cars, so I'm just going to keep that in mind when negotiating on the price. Now, another thing I do before going to look at a car is seeing what the Kelley Blue Book value is. It looks like this car in good condition sells for about $3,200 on average, so for a quick sale, we're looking around $2,500. The car does look a little beat up. You can see from the picture, it does look like it needs a little bit of body work, and also, I'm sure there's a bunch of scratches because it is beat up. So I'm just going to go with the $2,500 to $2,700 range when I'm looking to sell the vehicle. Now, I can't stress this enough, I do not use Kelley Blue Book retail value when buying a car, and some people swear by the NADA, but the main reason that I do use Kelley Blue Book is because everyone and their mother knows about Kelley Blue Book value, and I've heard hundreds of times when selling a car, but Kelley Blue Book says this. So that's what I just use in determining what I'm going to sell the car for, because that's what people are going to use when they determine what they're going to buy a car for. So now we're going to actually look at what I should buy it for. Now, if you click here on the little tab that says trade-in, you can see that the number is way lower. This is going to be the amount of money that you can expect if you were to go trade your car in at a dealership, or around what you could pay if you were to go to an auction like a dealer would. Now, you want to get as close to this number as you possibly can, or even better, get right under that $900 mark. Dealers will only pay this super low price because they account for the unforeseeables. You never know what you're going to get when you get a used car. Even if it's only a few years old, with no warranty, there is always a risk. Now, since this car hasn't even ran in months, you better believe I'm going to go for under that $900 mark, because the longer a car sits, the more seized up the engine gets, the more electrical problems it could have from rats chewing wires. So definitely under that $900 mark is where I'm going to be. So at this point, what I would usually do is shoot the seller a message asking if he has any wiggle room on the price. Now, I don't like doing much negotiation on the phone or over text, but I always ask about wiggle room. Now, do not mistake this for talking numbers. You really don't want to talk numbers over text or over the phone, but you do want to throw some feelers out there to make sure they are not super firm. Some people will list cars out there for $2,500, and if you show up with $2,400, they will not even consider it. So I always recommend throwing something out there like, are you flexible on the price at all, or do you have any wiggle room, just to see what kind of seller they are. That way you know you can move around the price and work out a deal. Now, this guy already made the indication that there was some flexibility there, and I think I can make a little money on this car. So I set out to see the car in person. Now, again, what we talked about is some common issues on the car. So be sure that you already have done your homework on the car before leaving to go check it out. So we already have learned about the power steering on this car, likes to act up a little bit. So on the test drive, we're definitely going to make sure that we test the steering and it doesn't feel too tight or too loose on the test drive. Now, if you've seen my other car flipping videos, you already know that I always like to bring an OBD reader with me before I go look at any car. I'm going to put 3 links in the description for 3 I recommend. One is going to be around the lower end point, about $50, great budget one. One's going to be mid-grade, about $100, and then a higher end one for around $150. I definitely recommend these if you're an at-home DIYer, like working on your car in your own garage, or if you're looking to get into car flipping. These are an absolute must-have. So upon arriving at the seller's house, the car was a little more beat up than I thought. The seats had some cigarette burns in them. You could see that someone actually locked themselves out of the car more than once, it looks like. Peeled a bunch of paint off of the door jamb of the car. The front headlight was a little bit cracked, so that definitely needed to be replaced. So really not a great start for this car, to say the least. I could see there was some nice dings on the steel wheels, so those absolutely needed to be replaced, because those aren't just cosmetic, that's going to create a nice rumble when you're driving the car. And since the car hasn't been started in months, I knew the battery would be completely dead, so I brought an extension cord and my jump starter with me. And after about 15 minutes of charging on 40 amps, it cranked over nicely, but no start. After a few tries, it started up actually quite nicely. I checked the AC out and it kicked on and blew nice and cold. The windows and all the locks seemed to work. It had a nice steady idle in a good idle range, and there was no sludge in the crankcase or radiator. So the last thing to do was take her on a test drive and make sure it ran okay. It read 110,000 miles on the dash, so really not bad at all. And to my surprise, it drove rather well. I made sure I took a lot of turns to feel the electric power steering system and made sure everything worked perfectly. Everything checked out good, the brakes checked out. It really drove pretty decent. The only thing bad is you could feel a little bump from the steel rim being bent, so now it's time to make an offer. Now, as I stated before, the car needed a little bit more work than I thought in order for me to get that $2,500 range to sell it. It needed a whole lot of little things: bodywork, new wheels, paint work, headlight, 2 tires were pretty much bald, and that's just things I could see. You always have to account, again, for the unforeseeables. So I told the guy, listen, I'm going to be straight up with you. This car needs way more work than I originally thought. I cannot see myself paying more than $500 for this car. It's not so much the amount of money that's going to go into it. It's just going to take many hours of body work and the cigarette holes that can't be fixed. $500 and your problem becomes mine. All you have to do is say yes. And to my surprise, he really didn't even disagree. I thought we were going to fight a little bit over the price and have a little bit of back and forth, but he agreed and he shook my hand, so I took the keys and I went on my way. So now on this drive home, I want to touch on a few things. Inspecting a car pre-purchase is one of the most important things that you can do in this entire process. So I can't explain everything here on this video, but I will have a video you can find in the description on how to thoroughly do an inspection on a car before you buy it. Now, I also want to touch on negotiation really quick as well. In my head, I was actually prepared to spend about $700 on this car even after the test drive. I figured $700, I was still able to make a little bit of profit on this since all the work was pretty much cosmetic. But I wanted to start low at $500. I was honestly expecting a little bit of a fight with him to go back and forth on the price, but to my surprise, he took the $500 with almost zero friction. So always start low, and a lot of time, you're actually going to be surprised they take that low number. So I'm about halfway home, about 10 minutes away from my house, and the car randomly shuts off. No indication of why it shut off, no putter or anything, it just randomly shut off. So I start the car up again, it runs for about 10 seconds before shutting off again. At this point, I know the car is not going to make it home, so I called my buddy who lived close by. He brought his truck and a chain, and he actually towed me about a few hundred feet into an empty parking lot where we left the car there for the night. So the next day I called the towing company and got the car actually dropped off right here in my garage. It only cost me about $80 since the car was pretty close, so not too bad. So let's start our money invested chart just to track and see how much money we have invested in the car total. We have $500 for the price of the car, and then we have $80 for the tow, so $580 total. So now we got the car back at the house, it's time to start fixing her up. So there's 5 main components to get an engine to run. We have fuel, that obviously makes a combustion. We have air that mixes with the fuel so it can combust. We have the spark that ignites the fuel and air mixture for combustion. We have the timing that makes sure each cylinder fires at the right moment. And finally, compression. That makes sure that everything is airtight in each cylinder so the engine can actually use the combustion. So the first thing I did was plug my OBD reader into the car to see if any error codes came back, and I got a message coming back saying P0087, fuel pressure too low. So my first thought was that the fuel pump is going out. So what you can do to check for a bad fuel pump is to turn the key one stage before the engine actually cranks, and you'll hear a slight hum coming from under the back seat. I heard a nice hum, so I knew the fuel pump did work at least a little bit, and then I started smelling gas. I took a peek under the car and I saw drops of fuel dripping from under the fuel tank. So I knew the fuel pump was definitely damaged, or one of the lines going in or out of it was busted. So I went and got a new fuel pump, and I did make a complete video on how to change the fuel pump in this car. A lot of cars have actually access ports under the back seat to get to the fuel pump, but unfortunately this car calls for dropping the fuel tank completely and replacing it that way. I have a full video on how to change a fuel pump by dropping the fuel tank. It's very similar in most cars, so if you want to check that out, it'd be a good educational video if you've never seen one done before. So now going back to our money invested chart, let's add another $75 for the fuel pump. So now that the fuel pump was all nice and new, I put the key in the ignition and I tried to start her up, and again I smelled gas, but even stronger this time. So I took another peek under the car to see what was leaking, and this time it was actually the gas lines. So I went under the car, and you can see right here under this heat shield, there was rusting to the point that these gas lines actually busted open. See, what these heat shields do is they trap salt and moisture, especially if you live in a cold climate where there's snow and salt on the ground, and holds it against the lines and it rusts them out completely. So I bought the materials and cut out all the rusted spots on all the fuel lines and put in some nickel copper alloy fuel lines. These actually never rust, so the next owner will not have to worry about that in the future. Now, I did make a complete video on how to repair your fuel lines, and if you live anywhere where there's snow or any salt on the ground from the snow, you might want to check out this video because it'll save you hundreds of dollars here in the future, so it's definitely worth a watch. So going back to the money invested chart, we're going to add another $40 for the materials that we use to repair the fuel lines. Alright, so now that we got a brand new fuel pump and the fuel lines are all fixed up, it was finally time to start her up. I got a whole lot of cranks, but it still didn't start. There was a little pressure gauge attachment on the fuel rail, and I pressed it, and I knew I was definitely getting fuel pressure, so fuel was not the issue. Now, like I said in the beginning of the video, I knew the timing chains on these 2.2s were very unreliable, so I checked out the timing chain, I pulled the valve cover off, and I noticed that the timing chain actually skipped a half a link. Maybe it jumped when I was driving, so I took the engine apart and I got it back in time, and you can see here the marks on the timing chain, the red and the green, need to be aligned with the cam sprockets and the crankshaft sprocket. They were off by a half a link, so that can definitely cause a car not to start. So when a car falls out of time, it's really important to check the valves and make sure nothing got bent inside the cylinders. Also, the valves can smack against a piston and it could crack a piston, so that could be a really big issue as well. So I made sure I looked at everything and nothing seemed bent and everything seemed all right inside each cylinder. So I got the timing all back and made sure all the marks on the chain lined up with all the marks on the sprockets. I also bought a new timing chain tensioner to make sure the timing chain stays nice and tight now. So let's add another $35 to our money invested chart. Now, before I try to start it up again, I did check the air box where the air filter is, because remember, the seller did say this car was sitting for months, and sometimes animals actually like to make little nests inside of these air boxes. So I wanted to rule out any air blockages as well. Everything looked good inside the air system. Now we know the fuel system is good, the air system is clear, and the car is back on time. It's now time to crank her up and see if we can finally get it running. And after cranking it again, it still didn't run. And I know for a fact it's not going to be a spark issue, because if it was a spark issue, it would definitely misfire before it would just die in the middle of the road. So I already ruled that out in my head. So last thing is a compression issue. And after performing a compression test, it seems like we have really low compression on cylinders 2 and 3, which are the two middle cylinders. So at this point, what I'm thinking is there's a blown head gasket in the middle, and it's causing a pressure leak in the middle two cylinders. Now, the only option I have left is to pull the cylinder head off the block. And honestly, at this point, I was ready to set the car on fire. I was pretty much over it, but going back to what I said earlier, I did account for the unforeseeables, and that's why I priced this car at about $500, and boy, was I getting my fair share of unforeseeables. So the next day, I did pull the cylinder head off, and I instantly knew what the issue was. I put a straight edge to the cylinder head and saw that this thing must have gotten super overheated. There was a huge bow in it. Now, what you can do is go to your local machine shop with your cylinder head if it is warped or slightly bent, and you can have them shave it down a little bit. But I knew right off the bat this bow was way too severe to shave down. It was over a millimeter here in the middle. Now, that would need to be shaved down so much that it would cause way too much compression, so the head was as good as scrap. So what I needed was a new head altogether. But before I just went ahead and bought a head, I wanted to make sure that the piston rings were okay. Because a cylinder head for this car, remanufactured, comes out to about $330. That's the best deal I found. But I really didn't want to spend the $330 if the piston rings were shot, because then the car still wouldn't have real compression and the engine wouldn't run right, and I really wouldn't feel comfortable selling it. So what I did is I poured a little oil in the middle two cylinders to make sure that the piston rings were okay. And after about 10 minutes, one of them drained out completely, and after only about 5 minutes, the other one drained out. So I knew that the piston rings were shot, or that the cylinder walls may have warped a little bit when the engine got overheated, and the block of this engine is aluminum, so it really is fragile to overheating issues. So simply put, it needs a whole new engine altogether. Now, I could always replace the piston rings and get a new cylinder head for it, but it could also be that the cylinder walls expanded, and that wouldn't really even help anything. So really, the best thing to do would be to replace the engine altogether. Now, to be honest, I have no idea how this car ran okay during the 10-minute test drive, and then it also made it another 10 minutes towards my house before it failed. My best educated guess is that the water pump failed on the ride home, and then with no engine temperature gauge on this car and no warning lights popping up, it might have overheated to the point that it caused the head to warp, and which caused the timing chain to slip, and the fuel pump and the fuel lines were just ready to go out. Needless to say, I got beat up pretty bad on this deal. So at this point, I have a car that needs hours and hours of body work, new seats, an entirely new engine, paint work, new rims, a new headlight, and that's just what I know at the time. When I first got this car, I was anticipating strictly cosmetic repairs and a quick service with fluids and filters, but boy was I wrong. So I decided to cut my losses and I scrapped the car for $300. Now, I know I said at the beginning of this video, today I'm going to show you guys how I took this super neglected, absolute nightmare of a Chevy Cobalt and turned it into thousands of dollars of profit. But sometimes it doesn't always go that way. Now, if you haven't already checked out my other flip videos where I made some really good money on them, then I would definitely go check those out so you know it's not all doom and gloom in the game of car flipping. But I'm not just here to make the business seem like a walk in the park. I'm here to show you guys the good, the bad, and the ugly side in this case. Now, do not let this discourage you guys. This does not happen all the time. More often than not, if you know what you're doing and you follow the steps that I show you, you will make money. Now, when it does happen this way, you need to learn when to actually throw in the towel and take the loss. Now, I could have thrown in a new motor, wheels, headlights, paintwork, and some body work and some seats and probably still made a bit of a profit. But my profit margin would have been pretty low and I would have spent hours and hours, and it would just make more sense to get another car, scrap this one, and start fresh with a potentially higher profit margin vehicle. So learning when to take the loss is a very important lesson that I want all you guys to learn here from this video. Now, if you guys are serious about getting into the game of car flipping, or need help starting a YouTube channel or help with your existing YouTube channel, I have started a Patreon where I do offer a monthly phone call with me personally and access to a Discord chat where I can actually personally help you start your venture into car flipping or YouTube career. Aries and Tony have actually already signed up for that program where they can talk to me personally. So if you want to start your own entrepreneurship with me as your coach, or if you just love the content and want to support the channel, you can click right here. Also, if you want to support the channel in style, I just dropped my brand new official Buddies DIY merch, and I'll leave a link in the description so you can check that out as well.